So, I'd like to welcome Shimron Walters from BitesizedGenius to this episode of the Business of AI podcast. Shimron, welcome. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about your background and what you're doing at the moment and how you set up BitesizedGenius and what you're sort of working on. So, maybe could we kick off by you telling us a bit about how you came here, what's your journey been to here, and how long BitesizedGenius has been going and what it does?
Sure. So as you said before, my name is Shimron Walters, and I recently left a 7-year career in the civil service while I was working on digital transformation programs to start my first business called Bite-sized Genius. So Bite-sized Genius provides training on how people can get the most out of AI for non-technical audiences. So taking all this technical jargon and words that, the open AI engineers are using, best practices, ways of using the technology, and sort of helping non-technical people who don't really understand that stuff know how to utilize the technology, and also building solutions like AI agents and automated workflows using tools like Copilot Studio. And so this is a company, my first company that I started about a month ago. It originally started off as a bit of a side hustle because I've always been interested in entrepreneurship, and I was trying to do something alongside my full-time job. But eventually I realized I had to leave it and sort of dive in with both feet if I wanted to make it work. And this business does stem from a long time passion for technology. Back when I was younger, I've always had an interest in technology, originally stemming in the realm of video games. So back when I was younger, I used to play games like RuneScape and, used to be into like, animation. I don't know if you remember back in the day, we used to have these stick figures that would fight each other and used to animate these things with like Adobe Flash and all of these other types of animation software. And that sort of got me interested in animation, got me interested in coding, and it also got me as well interested in just developing these types of things, having something I can interact with, something I could play with. And that sort of kicked off my interest in the tech space. But unfortunately, I didn't have a huge number of opportunities to really pursue that. Someone's coming from, a single parent house, so lower socioeconomic background, opportunities were quite limited for me to go and pursue tech. And so that was something which I've always sort of had an interest in, but it was sort of on and off in regards to my pursuit. And then eventually it became a bit more important in my life because when I turned 16, or so when I turned 11, I went into care. And something that I had to deal with at the time was being in an environment where I was growing up around people who were involved in things like gangs, county line crime, drug dealing, and other types of, things you might hear about in the news, especially in relation to young Black men in London. But something which did help me avoid going down that path in life was technology. So pursuing my interest in game design, coding, animation, and sort of using that as a way to learn new skills, especially because at the time I wasn't really in school, I was sort of in and out, sort of dealing with a lot of these sort of challenges. Being able to pursue my technological interests was something that allowed me to keep away from all of those sort of temptations that other young people were sort of going down.
Mm.
And then from there, I decided I was going to go in with both feet and went to go and do game design at university. And so that allowed me to go and learn skills like programming, to go and learn skills like animation and 3D modeling, but also it had an entrepreneurial angle because when you're making the game, you're also making a product that you would then go and put on like the app store, something that you'll go and sell. And so it's an opportunity as well for me to go and learn skills like project management, entrepreneurship, and how to build something that people will want to buy and sort of engage in. And so that sort of satisfied some of my technological interests. But unfortunately, the industry was very, very competitive, and I wasn't able to actually get a job in that industry at the time. And so that then led to me doing a career in the civil service while I was working in digital transformation projects. So projects like the New Horizon IT system, if you heard like the post office scandal that was going on, I was working to support that project for the Department for Business and Trade, and also working on global supply chains where they were looking at supply chain risks in relation to using like data science techniques and AI to predict, threats to PPE equipment and other supply chain disruptions that could happen, forced labor, these different types of risk when we're talking about importing products from other countries and,
Mm.
potential products that are subject to sanctions like vehicles from Russia or electric vehicles and these types of things. But despite working in the civil service and working on a lot of these digital transformation programs, I still had that feeling that I wanted to go into entrepreneurship and to return back to doing technology. And so I figured, why not start a business within the field of AI? Because it's something that's very topical. It's something which I found extremely helpful for my own personal development, but it's also something as well that a lot of people don't know how to use, and they need to learn how to use AI, because it's going to be a massive disruptor in various different fields, industries, and markets,
Mm.
especially in regards to the world of education, especially in regards to employment and people's abilities to get jobs. I mean, I was working in, the civil service, where a lot of people will struggle to use, say, an Excel spreadsheet. But, we're now moving on to AI, and people are still stuck with the basic Office 365 skills. And that software's been around for a very long time. And
Yeah.
so there is a huge conversation around how we plug that digital skills gap to help people essentially not get left behind. And so I did see a market opportunity there for me to go in and start teaching people about AI, but also looking at how some of these emerging technologies have a positive impact. Something which I've been working a lot with the charity sector for a number of years, supporting young people who are care experienced. This has involved me working with charities, organizations to do advocacy on behalf of young people who are in care. And something which doesn't really get brought up a lot is how technology is being used to actually address some of these problems, especially in regards to, as well, the prison sector, when you've got a lot of people in prison who are using very old legacy systems, very old technology, but are they actually being able to learn skills and develop familiarity with technology so that when they leave prison, they'll then be able to function in society? Or are they perhaps not getting those opportunities and perhaps, not be able to adjust very well?
Yeah.
And so lots of opportunities there. And something we might talk about later on is some of the work I might be doing with the university to look at how AI could be used within the children's social care sector to help professionals in that industry.
I'd love to unpack a little bit more about that and hear some of those case studies as well. But I mean, firstly, just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. That's remarkable. And I really appreciate the fact that you were able to kind of take us right back to, your youth, and to kind of root your interests in some of those challenges, that you found, those environments which were very challenging. But I'm also glad that now you're bringing that lived experience into what you were doing in the civil service, and now what you're doing for businesses as well. Because I think it's really important that we have more diversity and representation and different experiences coming into each of the roles, so that actually the industry that we're creating, but also the services and tools, reflect that broader society. But thank you for sharing that. I found that really interesting. So yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit now about the way in which you're able to maybe sort of use your experience of the civil service to then help figure out how to apply technology into some of those areas that you've mentioned. You gave a few examples already, but because I'm really interested, because when people think about the civil service, rightly or wrongly, they have the notion that things are quite bureaucratic, it's quite slow moving, and it's hard to get things done. Now, we at UKAI, we have the advantage of actually working with some very good civil servants who are driving forward the AI agenda across lots of different departments. So actually now I think we're seeing that they're hiring in a lot more people and they're empowering people, and things are changing. But still, there's that sort of, when it's operating at that sort of national level, it is hard to be fast. But you look at the solutions which are needed, either because those solutions are needed to need to use AI, which is moving quickly, or the problems in prisons or in social care or in health or education, the problems are urgent, so they need to be done fast. I want to ask you kind of like, what's your perception of matching those timelines, if you like, the slow sort of movement of the civil service versus the fast, urgent need of some of those industries?
So I think you're right. The civil service does suffer from a lot of bureaucracy, and there is a large process of, decision making and approvals that you have to go through in order to, make decisions, get things through the door that a for-profit organization would have to go through, right? I mean, something which was quite important within the civil service was this concept of governance and, what is the decision making, the audit trail, who's responsible, who's accountable. We'd all have all these sort of diagrams and charts and Excel spreadsheets, all this explaining the same thing. You're accountable, you're responsible, you're informed, and all these different frameworks and terminologies. All of this stuff really just slows down somebody making an executive decision that something needs to happen and then putting their money where their mouth is. Something which I feel the private sector was a lot better at dealing with. And unfortunately, this always has a negative impact on the people on the ground, because the decision makers are slow to get new technology into places that need it, and the people who need the technology are not going to benefit from it. And so it does have a massive impact. And I think a lot of work is going on to communicate the problem and the impact to the decision makers, so that things can be done a bit more quickly, a bit more of an agile way. But I think, you've got a number of competing priorities in this country beyond technology. And I think that, there has to be a balance between what people are trying to prioritize. Do we want to get, upgrade prisons with new technology, or do we want to focus our time and energy onto another area? And also, I think another important topic is, the decision makers, do they understand the technology? Do they understand the benefits? Do they have the right people advising them on how it could be used and implemented? Or is it a bit alien to them? Because I've spoken to people who are, or who were in decision-making capabilities or positions where I knew a bit more about technology than they did, but they were a bit more, influential in terms of how money gets spent and where it gets put. And so it's about being able to be in the room with those people, then to actually steer decisions in a way that benefits people.
Yeah. So you've obviously interacted now with quite a few of these decision makers in various public sector organizations. Can you talk us through some of the challenges, maybe some of the common challenges that you're finding as you're interacting with them, and then how you're solving some of those challenges?
Sure. So I think one of the first big challenges that I've encountered when speaking about AI with organizations is a lack of understanding of, or should I say, it's probably more fear of AI, because a lot of people don't understand AI, but they also fear that AI is going to perhaps be a massive risk to their organization in terms of, perhaps GDPR. We know that rules around how data protection works is constantly changing. And so there's a lot of confusion around how do you protect people's data when you're using AI. There's also a question around, are there enough benefits to adopting AI compared to just sticking with the legacy way of working? So, for example, if we never changed our processes, would it be the end of the world? Or is it the case that adopting AI is actually going to result in some meaningful changes that it's worth the investment? I also think as well, people have different appetites for adopting new ways of working and new technology. There'll obviously be concerns from people who work for organizations that there might be job losses, or the organization might be trying to become a bit more lean. But there'll also be people who just want to stick with their legacy ways of working, or who maybe, have an interest in AI, but they're just not really technically confident with learning those skills. And so there's a massive change management process in terms of bringing people along with you on that journey of adopting AI within an organization. But I feel like that journey begins with having the leadership being champions for AI. And oftentimes the people in positions of leadership can sometimes be the ones who are a bit hesitant about it. Maybe it's because, especially with people of an older generation, they might just be comfortable with the technology. They might be more familiar with legacy ways of working that has worked for them for a very long time, and they don't see a need to change.
Yeah. One of the dynamics that we see a lot within businesses is that it's often a top-down um, uh, reason for wanting to change or adopt AI. That someone at the top will be saying, right, I've read that we need to become an AI first company, or we need to adopt AI, we need to bring this new AI tool. So it's coming down from the top. And then the sort of the middle tries to make it happen, and it's going to push down. But then what you don't get is the adoption and the engagement from the people who are actually having to do the everyday tasks. And I wonder whether that's the same that you're seeing in the organizations you're interacting with, where it's, and then if that is the case, what does that mean in terms of how you provide training to in order to get people engaged?
Yeah, so it definitely is a lot more top down, in terms of leadership wanting to adopt a new technology to ensure that the organization remains competitive, but the people who do the work are perhaps a bit less confident about using it, a bit less willing to. And one of the ways in which I've been trying to address this is by going back to basics. So helping people understand, what is AI and what are some of the tools out there that you can use? How do you use those tools? What's the difference between the 4.0 and the O3 model, or the Chat GPT 5 model? Because OpenAI, to my knowledge, at no point ever explained what any of that means to the average person, unless you go into their documentation and then you can actually find it. But a lot of people won't think to go into technical documentation to find information about that. And so going back to basics and helping people understand how the technology works, how it can benefit them, and helping them to build up confidence, digital confidence with using these tools can definitely help people adopt it more, because people are going to be hesitant to adopt something that they don't understand, that they aren't really getting any value from compared to their previous ways of working. But when you take them through the technology, they can start to at least think of ways they can adopt it into their regular workflows and start to realize some of these benefits. And that only really happens when you take them back to basics and you say, well, this is how it works. This is how you can engage with it. And from there, you can then start to have more complex conversations around how it's embedded within the organization as a whole.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree with you there that education, understanding the fundamentals, gives that confidence. And there seems to be like a really critical foundation there. That I mean, it's kind of rooted in the basics of digital literacy, just understanding how to be able to use those tools, but also then having the confidence and the trust. I think that those tools aren't going to do something bad, and they aren't going to sort of lead to sort of a really bad outcome, which again comes from that sort of just basic understanding. And it all leads into trust then. And if you can actually get people to trust using some of these tools, then they're more likely to use it as a consumer using products and services, or citizens using the products and services. But also they're going to be an engaged employee to help build these products and services as well. So it feels very fundamental. Where does your training then fit into this? Where are you sort of, what type of briefs are you getting from organizations, and how do you help them?
So 2 examples I would use. I met with a client earlier, well, end of July, and they were a venture capital firm, a small venture capital firm. He wanted to bring me in to sort of talk about AI and AI agents. And what they wanted to understand was, how does AI work? How do AI agents and these sort of automated workflows work? What are our options in terms of adopting that technology into our organization? And how could we use that in relation to some of our use cases? And so I think that some of the questions people are asking is definitely around, use cases, how are we adopting this technology? And part of what I do is to provide that training, that consultancy in a way that's easy for them to understand. So being able to walk through, for example, how an AI agent works, and being able to break down some of the options for them in regards to developing it, in regards to the different types of tools. If you're a large organization worried about GDPR, you might not want to use tools that Make or Zapier, because those might have servers that are outside the UK. There might be some concerns there around how data is being handled. Maybe something like Copilot Studio might be a bit more suitable because, Microsoft already owns your tech stack. There's a lot more security there. And also in regards to another client that I worked with, which was a library, because I was doing essentially a bit like a Q&A/presentation for small businesses in the local area who wanted to learn a bit more about AI, providing that basic training of how these tools work, being able to demonstrate it. And you'll always have someone in the room who says, oh, I didn't know it could do that, or oh, I didn't know that was available, or that was an option. I actually showed someone who designs fans, how you can use ChatGPT to get those specifications for fans, sort of come up with like a costing plan, and maybe make videos about someone crafting a fan. And they were like, amazed, because they didn't know you can do it like that, and you can sort of get these results. And from there, I can already tell that they were more confident using the tool because they had seen what it can do. They had someone who can answer their questions. And providing that basic training is quite important before you then go into more advanced things, such as how do you design AI agents yourself? And, that in itself is a bit of a tricky topic, because everyone's, talking about vibe coding, and, oh, everyone's going to be a vibe coder making apps from their living room. But if you don't understand the basics of coding, the difference between a float and an integer, what a variable is, a string and different data types, an array of values, then how are you going to use all of these things to actually build these different AI agents and tools, and actually resolve errors and bugs and issues, and having the willpower to read through technical documentation that's likely outdated, and looking at these Reddit forums of issues people are having to see if you're trying to find a solution to fix a problem. It's an investment. And so start having a starting point where you can actually get people engaged is how you can then continue the conversation, especially with people who are a bit adverse to technology and just want to do what they're passionate about.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think what you were talking there about vibe coding, needing people doing vibe coding need to understand some of the framework of knowledge to be able to evaluate whether what you get back from the platform that you've used, you've just instructed to come up with some code, how do you evaluate whether it's good or not? How to spot, and when problems happen, how can you resolve them? So having that framework of knowledge is really important. And that's true, I think, across a range of different areas as well. I mean, you can actually look at a lot of the information which is coming out now. You have to have a framework of knowledge to know whether it's true, to know whether it's a bit too political, to know whether it's kind of biased. There's so many things. And this is I think the balance that we're sort of finding now, as a lot of these generative AI and LLM platforms are becoming so much more powerful now. People think, oh, well, I don't really need to do anything. I can just put my prompt in, it'll generate an output. But no, actually, it's more important than ever to have that framework of human knowledge and that human experience to be able to then evaluate and spot how accurate it is or how good it is. Just coming back to the questions which you were asking there as well. I mean, so it sounds like there's two parts of what you're providing in terms of the training. There's a technical side, how to use the tools, but then there's also like an organizational transformation side, how to get people on board and engaged, and how to get them to give that confidence, etc. Is there a balance? Do you do one of those things first, or is it both, or does it depend on the client?
It depends on what the client wants. The clients will usually tell me what they want to do, and then I'll do something based on what they requested. But typically, you would want to start off with basic training first, just because people will say they know how to use a particular tool, but they're just asking a question and getting a response. They never looked into things like prompt engineering. They've never looked into creating their own custom GPTs, customizing their GPT with instructions or using these other types of features, which, again, I never really explained to you. There's no wizard, there's no tutorial. It's all just, put in front of you for you to sort of dig into. And so starting with that basic introduction first can then open up opportunities to then look at other topics such as use cases. How are marketing teams going to adopt it? How are legal teams going to adopt it? People who are doing research, people who are providing customer service. And then once they start thinking for themselves about some of these solutions, some of these use cases, because they are the experts in their own domains, that's when we can look at working through developing, agents and workflows that can automate some of the more boring bits, so that you can then focus on other pieces of work, like engaging with clients and sort of realizing benefits.
Okay. And I wonder whether you can give us some of the examples of where you've actually sort of seen AI be transformative and have positive impacts, particularly within education, and some of the impact it's had on people's lives.
So I've only got a few examples of this, just because the business is relatively new. And so, I've only done so much work in regards to working with organizations to get this stuff involved. But one of my recent clients did decide that they were going to move forward with looking into AI and taking it a bit more seriously in regards to adopting it within their organization. And I think that's because I was able to help them realize that, there are a lot of use cases that you can adopt with the help of AI, and it can provide a lot of value for organizations. But in order to do that, I had to sit down with them and actually sort of taught them through an AI agent that I had built, and sort of taught them through the individual use cases to try and translate the no-code solution that they were seeing on screen into something which they could understand in terms of the work they do on a day-to-day basis and some of the benefits that could be realized. And also sitting down and working with small local businesses and sort of talking through them with some of their issues that they're going through. I feel like that does have a positive impact, because a lot of small businesses, they aren't particularly, and these are just the ones that I've spoken to locally, but they will dip their toe into certain things, like AI and these different tools and technologies, but they don't necessarily go the full mile. And so being able to show them how to do something like a particular prompting technique, or how to get a particular outcome or particular result, can actually make a difference between them using it in a very basic way or fully adopting it. And also, I know that there was a charity that I was speaking to who is looking at how they can adopt AI within their organization. They're currently working on their digital strategy to try and see how they can adopt that longer term. But, providing solutions such as a 24-hour chatbot that can provide resources for someone who's contacting them about their services. Let's say you've got a young person who's maybe homeless and they need to find shelter. They can interact with a chatbot and then get back a list of resources like, Centerpoint or any of these other types of organizations, 24 hours without having to speak to an actual person. If for example, it's an out of office type of situation. So there were a range of use cases that are sort of being explored and adopted, but I feel like, and this is something that I've noticed across a large number of organizations, it's still relatively early days.
Mm.
Lots of people are very new to it. Lots of people are very skeptical. Lots of people haven't even started adopting it yet. Most people I speak to have used ChatGPT or, maybe Gemini, but they're still very, they were taught to it in the personal capacity. But in terms of organizations adopting it to really realize benefits and to, have it as a core part of how they work, I think we're still a ways off at the moment.
Okay. So I remember within the not-for-profit sector, when I was running training courses many years ago, there was
Yeah.
always quite a large learning and development budget there, because those companies invested a lot in their employees to make sure they were constantly getting those skills. So I know you work a lot in the sort of not-for-profit sector.
Yeah.
Are you seeing them being quick to want to adopt these new skills in order to get their employees up to date on AI? Or where would you say they are in comparison to other sectors?
I think the charity sector is always a bit far behind other sectors, but that's because they have to go for fundraising in order to get money, within the organization to spend on their services. And one of the key areas, actually, which is kind of ironic, which all the organizations I speak to want to use AI, is in regards to fundraising. So how can they raise money with the help of AI to then have money that they can spend on things like training, learning and development, their services, marketing and all these other types of responsibilities that charities have. And so I think fundraising is one big area that I've seen a lot of interest in. Another one as well is in regards to compliance. So, there are a lot of compliance related activities that charities will have to go through, being able to automate or help with researching and drafting documents in relation to, ensuring that they are compliant with, the charity commission or whatever other body might be overseeing them, and ensuring that they've got all their ducks in a row is another big area for efficiency driving. And all of that can sort of help organizations, especially charities, spend less time working on researching and admin for all of these boring bits of paperwork, which they have to do. Otherwise, they get fined, they get, angry letters. And they can then spend more time on the actual service that they're providing to their client base. And so I think for the charity sector, there's a massive benefit for AI, especially considering that they aren't for-profit organizations. But I also think the danger of them being not-for-profit is that there's limits to how much of their money they can invest in teaching and upskilling people on AI technology versus the private sector, who might decide, well, we can actually invest in this and bring in solutions and, be able to afford it essentially and make cuts and whatever it is they need to do in other places.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because, as you've highlighted, one of the challenges with not-for-profits is that they have limited resources, limited funding. So AI-powered systems, processes, and tools can make them way more efficient, so they can do more with less. And it sounds like that's where you're going in and helping them to unblock some of those unblock some of those challenges by giving people the confidence to be able to start using the tools and trying them out and then figuring out how to build them.
Well, yeah, I mean, at least exposing them to it so they can begin that journey and sort of, have some ideas in their mind.
Can you sort of give us a sort of like a short summary of your approach at Bitesize Genius? And I like the name of your company, that is Bites. I wonder whether that's kind of like a key part of the way you give people confidence. But I wonder whether you could just summarize it. What's your approach?
Sure. So, I mean, Bitesize Genius, as I said before, provides training and solutions for businesses, organizations, charities to help them essentially learn they can use AI and also automate some of these more repetitive administrative processes, workflows, and try to realize the benefits of AI, the unrealized benefits. The name Bitesize Genius actually stemmed from back when I was doing it part-time, because originally the business was online courses in the YouTube channel. And so it was supposed to be very short form, straight to the point videos about AI, which would then give you the maximum amount of value, which is why it's like Bite-sized Genius, because it's short form, because people have very limited attention spans and, you don't want to make it like an hour-long technical video because people will sort of tune out. But at the same time, it's straight to the point, sort of gives you the information you need. You can reference it a bit like a book whenever you need to sort of go back to it. And also by working with us, you eventually become a bite-sized genius. You're not a full genius. You're not going to be, working for OpenAI on the MBA amounts of money designing LLMs and stuff like that. But you can become a bite-sized genius and at least know how to use ChatGPT, Google Gemini in a more efficient, better way. And maybe at some point even start, designing your own agents and solutions, or at least having the confidence to bring people in who can do that for you and investing in that technology space within your organization. And so the way I work is that I will sit down with organizations and sort of do, and this is depending on what it is they want, but it's always good to have a bit of a discovery call. So to understand what their challenges are, how they work, what they think it is that they want to get out of AI. And then I can apply my experience and sort of say, well, there's some opportunities here, or, there are some risks to what it is you're doing in this perspective. It might be better to approach a particular challenge in a different way. And basically being able to give that advice, sort of put together a training package, usually in the form of like a workshop, and then being able to present that and get people thinking and engaging about artificial intelligence in a way that's easy for non-technical people to understand. And in regards to solutions, that'll be me sitting down with a sort of subject matter experts and understanding their use case, how they work from start to finish, sort of going through that, that business analyst mindset of mapping out a process and then being able to sort of recreate a solution for it to help them realize benefits.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for summarizing your approach there. It sounds really interesting and an exciting time, I think, to be doing this right now, because we are still quite early on in this transformation, which all organizations are going through. So just as a closing thought then, I wondered whether I could ask you, what are you most excited about when you look at the opportunity ahead of you and all the things you could do? What's the thing that excites you the most?
I think the thing that excites me the most when it comes to AI is seeing how it can, and this is something that I know is still a bit ambiguous because nobody knows where AI is going to go in future, but seeing how AI can be used to help people who, for example, have special learning needs. Because I think AI has the ability to do something which in the past was very difficult to do, and that's to be a 24-hour, person who can replicate a teacher, replicate, a therapist or psychologist or someone who can replicate a particular expert in the field, and using that as a way to, for example, help take students who are struggling in, let's say, math, for example, and being able to have a tool that can sit with them and actually understand, well, what is it specifically about math that they're not getting? What are some tailor-made examples that I can then provide to them in order to help them improve their knowledge and essentially bridge that gap? Because, I remember back when I was in school, there was always a big gap between students who were at the top of their class, they were good at certain things, and students who were at the bottom and, they sort of struggled with learning topics like maths, geography, all of these different types of things. And I think that one of the ways that can be solved is by having AI as a bit like a 24-hour private tutor that the students can engage with to then plug knowledge gaps. Because I think in the world of AI, there's no reason why people can't become experts in multiple fields, especially if we implement it properly into the education system, being able to tailor education plans to a student's needs, being able to help people understand things that they perhaps would struggle with traditionally. And I think that on the topic of learning, this is even more important because there's always a risk that if you use AI as a crutch for your learning, you're outsourcing your thinking, you're outsourcing your brain's development. And so alongside AI being important for helping people learn, is a massive conversation around, well, how do you learn whilst using AI and actually using your brain rather than having AI do the work for you, which can affect your brain's development. And so I think in the world of bridging a lot of the inequalities we see, AI is going to play a really big, important role in that regard. And I think as well, it'll open up, a lot of new industries, opportunities and jobs. And yeah, it'll be a massive change. I'm not saying it's all going to be rosy peachy in terms of, because the Industrial Revolution wasn't rosy peachy, was it? It sort of did have a massive shockwave and impact on people's jobs, the way people worked. But, I think if we can get through it, there are benefits which can be realized on the other side and opportunities for people to, go back to making money, providing for their families and sort of living lives that were a bit more familiar, right? In terms of the things people really care about, in terms of, having set up a household and being able to bring in an income. But there were a lot of benefits in regards to the education space specifically.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you for that vision. I think you're absolutely right. It is really exciting to think about how this powerful technology can really help address some of the inequality in society and
Mm.
provide better education for those people who are maybe not getting the access to the resources and the level of education. But of course, any field really, it simply has potential to be able to kind of bridge those divides and
Yeah.
make society better if we as an industry come together to be to set out what we believe is the responsible way forward. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do at UKAI is by bringing everyone together to set out a responsible AI industry. It means we won't recreate those same inequalities which the Industrial Revolution created, because it was just kind of unfettered in the way it kind of it kind of went out to kind of build those businesses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of people do worry that AI is going to, take over or get out of control. But, we as human beings, we made the technology. And so we can control how the technology gets used. And I think that that's something we need to empathize because, it's not something that came from outer space and we're just trying to figure out how it works. And, it's something which we developed. We have the control over how it gets used, when it gets used, wherever it gets used, the legislation, the policy around it. And, look at what the government's doing with the Online Safety Act, for example, trying to push through policies in regards to who can access what type of content online. We do have control over how the technology is used. I think we're going through that teething, that storming, forming, norming phase of trying to figure out how best to utilize the technology, balancing societal needs with also the benefits of, corporations who obviously want to become more efficient, become a bit more lean, and trying to strike a balance as well. But yeah, I think, it's a journey to get there, but I do think the benefits are definitely going to be huge. And, it's up to us to decide how we manage that in the end.
Yeah. Thank you, Shimron. We've covered a lot of ground. We've gone from your background, which was fascinating to hear what drives you and through the civil service and the way in which then organizations are going through that transformation and everything that you've learned from the civil service that you can now help other organizations go through those challenges. And then some of the training and the way you approach that, which I found really interesting to hear the way you're going through that and you're using that sort of bite-sized approach to give people the confidence to be able to then sort of develop their own learning journeys. And now we've gone on to sort of this bigger picture and how we set out the parameters and the guardrails to create a responsible AI industry. So covered a lot of ground there. But thank you for joining us today. It's been great to hear your story and to hear more about Bite-sized Genius. And I look forward to getting you keeping you more involved with what we're doing at UKAI. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Looking forward to seeing what the Trade Association does.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again. And take care of yourself. Speak soon.
Thanks. Bye.